Greetings, one and all. Welcome to the pre-show. How you doing? Good to see you. This is not the show. It is the pre-show. So don't get too excited quite yet. It's Friday night, New Year's weekend. I hope you all have some either fun plans or fun plans at home. When you're a parent, you know how that goes. So welcome to all of you. And let's see, what time is it? It's we got about 2.5 minutes left before we go live over on the radio station. So I'm going to do a little reading tonight. So there's Rowan, the 11-year-old, peeking in to see that we're all okay. What? So far. In the chat room.
No, look.
I know, that's in the chat room. See? One person in the chat room.
I thought that was how many people were watching.
Nope. It's how many are signed into the chat room. Okay, we got about 1.5 minutes left. Middle child, there's Matt Finn. See, now it's up to 2.
That's weird.
How you doing, Master Finn? Good to see you. Okay, Scram, get out of here.
Why? What's wrong with me?
Bye. Because
I don't love you either.
I don't love you either. You're adopted.
I know.
We took you in to help a poor family. All right. There, now that we got the family business out of the way. Carl Mulek. How you doing, brother? Good to see you. Nice to see you in here. Tonight, we're going to read stories, and that's what we're going to do. We got a minute left till we go live on air over at subspace.radio in audio format only. And so I thought this would be kind of fun. Reading from this book, Faerie and Folk Tales of Ireland, edited by William Butler Yeats. So it was edited, over 100 years ago. So what do we got here? I got to put on my glasses these days. See the time. 35 seconds after the hour. We got about 20 seconds left, and we go live. About 10 more seconds. We're going to go dark for a little bit, and then we'll be back with the live broadcast. So everybody, get ready. Going dark.
The Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Friday evening, everyone. Welcome to the program. I am your host, Scotty Roberts, of This Year My Show, the Intrepid radio program. We are back in the home studio, and hope you're doing well this Friday night. Remember, you can listen to this show in its audio format over on subspace.radio, and that's in audio format only. And you can watch the video stream where you can see my small child coming in to make a face and have you all see her. That's over on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. You got something to say? Okay, scram, Sam. I love you. Bye. See ya. Goodbye. Doing radio. See ya. All right. There you go. All right, that's Ellery, the youngest. And bye. And they're making their presence known tonight. And good to see you too, Matt, says Morgan Snow and Matt Finn, and everybody's starting to gather over there. Good to see you guys on a Friday evening before New Year's. And of course, if you come over to the YouTube channel, you can subscribe. If you're not subscribed, do that already. And click the little bell. It will give you notifications for when this show airs. And also, you can hit the join button. You can see 3 ways to join this channel and put a little oomph behind your friendship in listening to this channel. And that just helps us stay afloat over here. And we thank you for it in advance. And let's see, what else have I got for you by way of babble at the beginning of the show? I think that might be about it. You can also catch us on the Facebook channels. Those chat rooms, by the way, if you're connecting via Facebook, you might not see everybody's chat over in that shows up over in the YouTube channel. So if you want to see the full chat, the full shebang, the full Monty of chatting and fellow Intrepids to this program, go on over to the YouTube channel, and you'll enjoy the conversation that goes on over there. And I think I don't have very much more to promote, other than I want you to go over to my friend Andy Dabbs' page to see his new book. And you can go to AntoneDabbs.com. You can also go join over at, and I'm going to type this in, I guess. I got my keyboard sitting way over here. So go to www.AntoneDabbs.com. This is the book that I wrote with Andy Dabbs. It was his memoirs, so he fed me all of his memoirs and all his things he wanted in the book, and I bookified them, and I wrote them to fit into a cogent flow in his book. And we also made the book about his anxieties and struggling with anxiety, things like that. So it's a very good read. You can go to AntoneDabbs.com. You can also go to over on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/ or just look up Books by Antone, Anton Dabbs, Dabbs. Books by Antone Dabbs. And you'll get to the Facebook page. Same thing over on Instagram. And we've got 3 different versions of the book are available. There is the soft cover black and white interior. There's the soft color full color interior. And there is the hardcover full color interior, the premium special book. So go on over, check those out. That's Antone's new book. We're working on a new book already on anxiety and struggling with anxiety beyond just what was written about in his memoirs. So more focused on how do you deal with this stuff? What do you do with it? Where do you go with it? Go check it out and join his page over on Facebook. And that'll help a lot. And if you want to read the book, go ahead and pick it up. And that's all I got to say about that. So for those of you who are gathering, welcome to the program tonight. As the title suggests, we're going to be talking about Faerie and folk tales of Ireland tonight. But less than talking about them, I picked up this book. And I love this book. It's Faerie and Folk Tales of Ireland, and it's edited, you see down on the bottom here, edited by W.B. Yeats, or William Butler Yeats. He was the poet laureate of Ireland at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. And he was a very strong believer in the spirit world. Now, nowadays, it's not quite as bad. It's becoming a little more acceptable. But 20, 30 years ago, when I first started reading about a lot of this stuff, if you said that somebody was a believer in the fairies or the fae folk and so on, you'd kind of look askance like, really? An intelligent person believes in those beings? Aren't they just fairy tales and things like that? Charlotte! I don't know if I can say your real name on here. People might know who you are. Barbara Walters is dead. You may want to mention it. I think we just did. So it looks like Barbara Walters has passed away. We'll do... I'm not sure if everybody knows who you really are and if you want them knowing, Charlotte. So Charlotte Pagnotta. And so if you want to say your name, you say it, and I'll tell everybody who you are. But and your post is public anyway, over in the chat room. So Barbara Walters, I don't know much of enough to say about her as eulogizing, other than rest in peace. I didn't know much about her in latter years. Of course, I knew who she was and saw a lot of her interviews and things like that. And so there it is. So long to Barbara Walters. And maybe we'll talk about that another time if I talk to Nancy, and we'll see. Or I'm sorry, Carlotta. When I talk to her and find out a little more detail, if she's got something on her mind that to break into the show with that. So that's interesting information. But so long, farewell, Barbara Walters. All right. So glad to make you laugh, Charlotte. I get Charlotte. I don't know why I'm pronouncing it weird. Anyway, it's probably the Pagnata. So at the end. So tonight we're talking about the fairy and folk tales of Ireland. And I'm not going to be talking about it so much like top of my head type of stuff, other than a few mentions, I'm sure. But I've got this book, and I started mentioning this book, The Faerie and Folk Tales of Ireland, and it's edited by William Butler Yeats, and the poet laureate of Ireland back 100 years ago. And so he took a lot of these folk tales. I've got other books of his that are, I thought I had it, right here. This is a totally different book that he did, The Irish Myth, Legend, and Folklore, Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry, edited by William B. Yeats. So this is a very good book. And I've read stories to my kids out of this book for years. And so that's that one. But this one, let's get into reading some of these. And I wanted to read these stories to you tonight, just for fun. It's a Friday night show. We can talk a little bit about them in the captain's cabin, or pose your questions. And as I see them over in the chat room, I might try to give them an answer. But I may have to put on my glasses for this. So bear with me. There we go. Now, do I look more intelligent, like I can read more now? So let's start with a couple of tales. And this book is divided in sections. And this is on the fairy folk, the Fae. And the first story is Frank Martin and the Fairies. I think that's the first one I wanted to do. Yes. So Frank Martin and the Fairies. This one's the longest one out of this book that I'm going to read tonight. So Frank Martin and the Fairies by William Carleton. Field Guy says, when I read, I wear pants mostly. Yes, I had pants on tonight. So Martin was a thin, pale man when I saw him, of a sickly look and a constitution naturally feeble. It'd be good if I was actually Irish and I could read this to you with an accent. His hair was light auburn, and his beard mostly unshaven, and his hands of a singular delicacy and whiteness, owing, I dare say, as much to the soft and easy nature of his employment as to his infirm health. In everything else, he was as sensible, sober, and rational as any other man. But on the topic of fairies, the man's mania was peculiarly strong and immovable. Indeed, I remember that the expression of his eyes was singularly wild and hollow, and his long, narrow temples sallow and emaciated. Now, this man did not lead an unhappy life, nor did the malady he labored under seem to the production of either pain or terror to him, although one might be apt to imagine otherwise. On the contrary, he and the fairies maintained the most friendly intimacy in their dialogues, which I fear were woefully one-sided ones, must have been a source of great pleasure to him, for they were conducted with much mirth and laughter, on his part at least. Well, Frank, when did you see the fairies? Whist! There's 24 of them in the shop, the weaving shop. This minute. There's a little old fellow sitting on top of the old sleighs, and all the rocked while I'm weaving. The sorrow's in them, but they have the greatest little scamers alive. So they are. See, there's another of them at my dressing noggin. Go out of that, you schmogon. Out, you schmogon, or bad sesame. If you don't, but I'll have you a mark. Ha! Cut, you thief, you. Frank, aren't you afeard of them? Afeard, as Ken Ballas might say, aren't you afeard of them? Is it me? Arra, what would I be afraid of them for? Sure, they have no power over me. And why haven't they, Frank? Because I was baptized against them. What do you mean by that? Why, the priest that christened me was told by my father to put in the proper prayer against the fairies, and a priest can't refuse it when he's asked, and he did so, begorra. It's well for me that he did. Let the tallow alone, you little glutton. See, there's a weeny thief of them eating at my tallow. Because, you see, it was their intention to make me king o' the fairies. Is it possible? Devil a lie in it. Sure, you may ax them, and they'll tell you. Oh, what size are they, Frank? Oh, little wee fellows, with green coats and the purtiest little shoes you've ever seen. There's two of them, both old acquaintances of mine, running along the yard beam. That would follow with the bog wig is called Jim Jam, and the other chap with the three-cocked hat, it's called Nicky Nick. Nicky plays the pipes. Nicky gave us the run. Nicky, give us a tune, or I'll melavogue you. Come on now, lo, Ern shore whilst now listen. The poor fellow, though weaving as fast as he could all the time, yet bestowed every possible mark of attention to the music, and seemed to enjoy it as much as if it had been real. But who can tell whether that which we look upon as a privation may, after all, be a fountain of increased happiness, greater, perhaps, than any which ourselves enjoy. I forget who the poet is that says, mysterious are thy laws, the visions finer than the view. Her landscape nature never drew so fair as fancy draws. So many a time, when a mere child, not more than 6 or 7 years of age, have I gone so as far as Frank's weaving shop, in order, with a heart divided between curiosity and fear, to listen to his conversation with the good people. From morning till night his tongue was going mostly as incessantly as his shuttle, and it was well known that at night, whenever he woke out of his sleep, the first thing he did was to put out his hand and push them, as it were, off his bed. Go out of this, you thieves, you. Go out of this now and let me alone. Nicky, is this any time to be playing the pipes, and me wants to sleep? Go off now. Troth, if ye's do, you'll see what I'll give ye tomorrow. Sure, I'll be making new dressings, and if ye's behave decently, maybe I'll leave you the scrappings o' the pot. There now. Och, poor things. They're decent creatures. Sure, they're all gone, barren poor Redcap that doesn't like to lave me. And then the harmless monomaniac would fall back into what we trust was an innocent slumber. About this time, there was said to have occurred a very remarkable circumstance, which gave poor Frank a vast deal of importance among the neighbors. A man named Frank Thomas, the same in whose house Mickey McRory held the first dance at which I ever saw him. As detailed in a former sketch, this man, I say, had a child sick, but of what complaint I cannot now remember, nor is it of any importance. One of the gables of Thomas's house was built against, or rather into, a forth or rath called Towny, or properly Tonag Forth. It was said to be haunted by the fairies. And what gave it character peculiarly, I hate saying that word, by the way, peculiarly wild in mine eyes, was that there were on the southern side of it 2 or 3 little green mounds, which were said to be the graves of unchristened children, over which it was considered dangerous and unlucky to pass. At all events, the season was midsummer, And one evening about dusk, during the illness of the child, the noise of a handsaw was heard upon the Forth. This was considered rather strange, and after a little time a few of those who were assembled at Frank Thompson's went to see who it could be that was sawing in such a place, or what they could be sawing at so late an hour, for everyone knew that nobody in the whole country about them would dare to cut down a few white thorns that grew upon the Forth. On going to examine, however, judge of their surprise when, after surrounding and searching the whole place, they could discover no trace of either saw or sawyer. In fact, with the exception of themselves, there was no one, either natural or supernatural, visible. Then they returned to the house and had scarcely sat down when it was heard again within 10 yards of them. Another examination of the premises took place, but with equal success. Now, however, while standing on the Forth, they heard the sawing in a little hollow about 150 yards below them, which was completely exposed to their view, but they could see nobody. A party of them immediately went down to ascertain, if possible, what this singular noise and invisible labor could mean, but on arriving at the spot, they heard the sawing, to which they were now added hammering and the driving of nails upon the Forth above, whilst those who stood on the Forth continued to hear it in the hollow. On comparing notes, they resolved to send down to Billy Nelson's for Frank Martin, a distance of only about 80 or 90 yards. He was soon on the spot, and without a moment's hesitation, solved the enigma. "'Tis the Faeries," he said. "I see them, the busy craturs they are." "But what are they sawing, Frank?" "They're making a child's coffin," he replied. "Have the body already made, and they're now nailing the lid together. I can tell a priest this way is coming." I may have skipped a page. I did. That night, the child died. And the story goes that on the second evening afterwards, the carpenter who was called upon to make the coffin brought a table out front to Thomas's house at the Forth as a temporary bench, and it is said that the sawing and hammering necessary for the completion of his task were precisely the same which had been heard the evening but one before. Neither more nor less. I remember the death of the child myself and the making of its coffin, but I think the story of the supernatural carpenter was not heard in the village for some months after its interment. Frank had every appearance of a hypochondriac about him. At the time I saw him, he might be about 34 years of age, but I do not think from the debility of his frame and infirm health that he has been alive for several years. He has an object of considerable interest and curiosity, and often after I had been present when he was pointed out to strangers as the man that could see the good people. There you go. You know anybody like that? They can see the good people. I see ghosts. There's another one I have marked here. The Priest's Supper. And it goes like this. This is by T. Crofton Crocker. It is said by those who ought to understand such things that the good people, or the fairies, are some of the angels who were turned out of heaven and who landed on their feet in this world, while the rest of their companions, who had more sin to sink them, went down further to a worse place. But as it may be, there was a merry troop of fairies dancing and playing all manner of wild pranks on a bright moonlight evening toward the end of September. The scene of their merriment was not far distant from the Inchigila, there you go, in the west of the country, Cork, a poor village, although it had a barrack for soldiers, but great mountains and barren rocks like those about it are enough to strike poverty into any place. However, as the fairies can have everything they want for wishing, poverty does not trouble them much. and all their care is to seek out unfrequented nooks and places where it is not likely that anyone will come to spoil their sport. On a nice green sod by the river's side, there were little fellows dancing in a ring as gaily as may be, with their red capes wagging about at every bound in the moonshine, and so light were these bounds that the lobs of dew, although they trembled under their feet, were not disturbed by their capering. Thus did they carry on their gambol, spinning round and round, and twirling and bobbing and diving and going through all manner of figures, until one of them chirped out, "Cease, cease with your drumming! Here's an end to our mumming. By my smell, I can tell a priest this way is coming." And away every one of the fairies scampered off as hard as they could, concealing themselves under the green leaves of the lusmon, where, if their little red capes should happen to peep out, they would only look like its crimson bells, and more hid themselves in the shady side of the stones and brambles, and others under the bank of the river, and in the holes and the crannies of one kind or another. The fairy speaker was not mistaken, for along the road, which was within view of the river, came Father Horrigan on his pony, thinking to himself that it was so late he would make an end to his journey at the first cabin he came to. According to this determination, he stopped at the dwelling of Dermond Leary, lifted the latch, and entered with, "My blessings on all here." I need not say that Father Horrigan was a welcome guest wherever he went, for no man was more pious or better beloved in the country. Now it was a great trouble to Desmond that he had nothing to offer his reverence for supper as a relish to the potatoes, which the old woman, for so Drummond called his wife, though she was not much past 20, had down boiling in a pot over the fire. He thought of the net which he had set in the river, but as it had been there only a short time, the chances were against his finding a fish in it. No matter, though, Dermond, there can be no harm in stepping down to try, and maybe, as I want the fish for the priest's supper, that one will be there before me. Down to the riverside went Dermond, and he found in the net as fine a salmon as ever jumped in the bright waters of the spreading Lee. But as he was going to take it out, the net was pulled from him, and he could not tell how or by whom, and away got the salmon, and went swimming along with the current as gaily as if nothing had happened. Desmond looked sorrowfully at the wake which the fish had left upon the waters, shining like a line of silver in the moonlight, and then with an angry motion of his right hand and a stamp of his foot, gave vent to his feelings by muttering, "May bitter bad luck attend you night and day for a blackguard schemer of a salmon wherever you go. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, if there's any shame in you, to give me the slip of this fashion. And I'm clear in me own mind you'll come to no good, for some kind of evil thing or other helped you. Did I not feel it pull the net against me as strong as the devil himself?" Gotta love Irish curses. "That's not true for you," said one of the little fairies, who had scampered off at the approach of the priest, coming up on Dermond Leary with a whole throng of companions at his heels. "There was only 12 of us pulling against you." Dermond gazed on the tiny speaker with wonder, who continued, "Make yourself no ways uneasy about the priest's supper, for if you'll go back and ask him one question from us, there will be as fine a supper as ever was put on a table spread out before him in less than no time." "I'll have nothing to do with you," replied Dermond in a tone of determination, and after a pause he added, "I'm much obliged to you for your offer, sir, but I know better than to sell myself to you, or the likes of you, for a supper. And more than that, I know Father Horrigan has more regard for my soul than to wish me to pledge it forever out of regard to anything you could put before him. So there's an end of that matter. Well, quite strong belief there. The little speaker, with a pertinency not to be repulsed by Dermond's manner, continued, "Will you ask the priest one civil question for us?" Dermond considered for some time, and he was right in doing so, but he thought that no one could come to harm out of asking a civil question. "I see no objection to that same, gentlemen," said Dermond, "but I will have nothing in life to do with your supper. Mind that." "Then," said the little speaking fairy, whilst the rest came crowding after him from all parts, "go and ask Father Horrigan to tell us whether our souls will be saved at the last day, like the souls of good Christians. And if you wish us well, bring back word that he says without delay." Away went Dermond to his cabin, where he found the potatoes thrown on the table, and his good woman heading the biggest of them all, a beautiful, laughing red apple, smoking like hard-ridden horse on a frosty night, over to Father Horrigan. "Please, your reverence," said Desmond after some hesitation, "may I make bold to ask you, your honor, one question?" "What may that be?" asked Father Horrigan. "Why, then, begging your reverence's pardon for my freedom, it is, if the souls of the good people are to be saved at the last day." "Who bid you ask me that question, Leary?" said the priest, fixing his eyes upon him sternly. Such Desmond could not stand before at all. "I'll tell no lies about the matter, and nothing in life but the truth," said Dermond. "It was the good people themselves who sent me to ask the question, and there they are in thousands down on the bank of the river, waiting for me to go back with the answer." "Go back by all means," said the priest, "and tell them, if they want to know, to come here to me themselves, and I'll answer that or any other question they're pleased to ask with the greatest pleasure in life." Dermond accordingly returned to the fairies, who came swarming round about him to hear what the priest had to say in reply. And Dermond spoke out among them like a bold man as he was, but when they heard that they must go to the priest, away they fled, some here and more there, and some this way and more that, whisking by poor Desmond so fast and in such numbers that he was quite bewildered. When he came to himself, which was not for a long time, back he went to his cabin and ate his dry potatoes along with Father Horrigan, who made quite light of the thing. But Desmond could not help thinking it a mighty hard case that his reverence, whose words had the power to banish the fairies at such a rate, should have no sort of relish to his supper, and that the fine salmon he had in the net should have been got away from him in such a manner. That's that story. What do you got? We're at 9:30. What are you thinking of these stories? These are old stories. If they were edited by William Butler Yeats, this would have been edited over 100 years ago. So these are the old stories of the countryside and of the fairies and of ghosts. We've got a couple of ghost stories in here we're going to hit if we have time for them all. But let me read you one quick. There's a poem in here, and it's written by Samuel Ferguson. It's called The Fairy Well of Lagnanay. 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 Mournfully sing mournfully. Oh, listen, Ellen, sister dear. Is there no help at all for me, but only ceaseless sigh and tear? Why did he not who left me here, with stolen hope steal memory? Oh, listen, Ellen, sister dear, mournfully sing mournfully. I'll go away to Schleamish Hill, I'll pluck the fairy hawthorn tree, and let the spirits work their will, I care not if for good or ill. So but lay the memory which all my heart is haunting still. Mournfully sing mournfully, the fairies are a silent race, and as pale as lily flowers to see. I care not for a blanched face, but for wandering in a dreaming place. So I but banish memory. I wish I were with Anna Grace. Mournfully sing mournfully. Hearken to my tale of woe. 'Twas thus to weeping Ellen Con. Her sister said in accents low, her only sister, Una Bon. 'Twas in their bed before the dawn. And Ellen answered sad and low, O Una, Una, be not drawn. I hearken to my tale of woe. To this unholy grief I pray, which makes me sick at heart to know. And if I help you, if I may, the fairy well of Langnanay. Lie nearer me, I tremble so. Una, I've heard wise men say, hearken to thy tale of woe, that if before the dews arise, true maiden in its icy flow, with pure hand bathe her bosborn eyes thrice, three lady brackens pluck likewise, and three times round the fountain go, she straight forgets her tears and sighs. Hearken to my tale of woe. All alas and well away, O sister Ellen, sister sweet, come with me to the hill, I pray, and I will prove that blessed freet. They rose with soft and silent feet. They left their mother where she lay, their mother and her care discreet. All alas and all away. And soon they reached the fairy well, the mountain's eye, clear, cold, and grey. Wide open in the dreary fell, how long they stood there vain to tell. At last upon the point of day, Bon Una bears her bosom swell. All alas and well away. Thrice o'er her shrinking breast she laves the glidden glance that will not stay of subtly streaming fairy waves, and now the charm three bracken craves. She plucks them in her fringed array. Now round the well her fate she braves. All alas and well away. Save us all from fairy thrall. Ellen sees her face the rim. Thrice and thrice and all that all, fountain, hill, and maiden swim, all together melting dim. Una, Una, thou mayst call, sister sad, but lithe or limb. Save us all from fairy thrall. Never again of Una Brawn, where now she walks in dreamy hall. Shall eye of mortal look upon? Oh, can it be the guard was gone, the better guard than shield or wall? Who knows on earth saves Yurla Dwayne? Who I don't know who that is in relation to this poem. But save us all from fairy thrall. Behold, the banks are green and bare. No pit is here wherein to fall. Aye, the fount you may well stare. But not save pebbles smooth as there, and small straws twirling one and all. Hie thee home, and be thy prayer. Save us all from fairy thrall. Now that one went pretty much over my head, as much as it may have gone over yours. So, but very interesting to read. A little difficult sometimes in the older language that's used here. So let's move on. Going to read you some more. Far Derig in Donegal, the Solitary Fairies is the section of the book that we're in. And again, for those of you joining late, we're just reading from this book, Faerie and Folk Tales of Ireland, and it was edited by William Butler Yeats back over 100 years ago, the poet laureate of Ireland. So these are tales of, as he puts it, the Irish peasantry that were put together. So I'm just looking here a little bit. Let's see. I'm going to watch The Quiet Man after this, says Chuck Thurston. Great movie. I love that movie. Remember Squire Danaher, Will Danaher? He says to his lackey, I can't think of his name. He goes, do you have the book? And he says, I do, Squire. He says, write his name in it. He says, I've written it, Squire. Now scratch a line through it. So Squire Danaher, Red Will Danaher. So it's a great movie. Probably one of the best John Wayne movies. I like John Wayne for other things, his action movies, his war movies, his cowboy movies. But I really liked him in The Quiet Man. It was a what's the word I'm looking for? A deviation, a derivation for him to do a movie like that. So you'd picture a different actor in that role because it was a romantic role. But at the same time, he was the old boxer, the retired boxer at the same time. So there you go. You'll have to watch that one. Guinness, says Roger Rabbit. That's right. I've got a Guinness brew sitting over here, unopened. It's another coffee Guinness, but that's for breakfast. Let's move on. Fair Derrig in Donegal by Miss Lolita McClintock. It goes like this. Pat Driver, the tinker, was a man well accustomed to a wandering life and to strange shelters. He had shared the beggar's blanket in smoky cabins. He had crouched beside the still in many a nook and corner where poteen was made on the wild Inishowen mountains. He had even slept on the bare heather, or on the ditch with no roof over him but the vault of heaven. Yet were all his nights of adventure tame and commonplace when compared with one special night. During the day preceding that night, he had mended all the kettles and saucepans in Moville and Greencastle, and was on his way to Culdaff when night overtook him on a lonely mountain road. He knocked at one door after another, asking for a night's lodging, while he jingled his halfpence in his pocket, but was everywhere refused. Where was the boasted hospitality of Inishowen, which he had never before known to fail? It was of no use to be able to pay when the people seemed so churlish. Thus thinking, he made his way toward a light, and little further on, and knocked at another cabin door. An old man and woman were seated at one each side of the fire. Will you be pleased to give me a night's lodging, sir? Asked Pat respectfully. Can you tell a story? Replied the old man. No, then, sir, I canna say I'm good at storytelling, replied the puzzled tinker. Then you maun just gang further, for none but them that can tell a story will get in here. This reply made in so decided a tone that Pat did not attempt to repeat his appeal, but turned away reluctantly to resume his weary journey. A story indeed, muttered he. Auld wives' fables to please the weans. As he took up his bundle of tinkering implements, he observed a barn standing rather behind the dwelling home, and aided by the rising moon, he made his way toward it. It was clean. It was a roomy barn with a piled-up heap of straw in one corner. Here was a shelter not to be despised, so Pat crept under the straw and was soon asleep. He could not have slept very long when he was awakened by the tramp of feet, and peeping cautiously through the crevice in his straw covering, he saw 4 immensely tall men enter the barn, dragging a body which they threw roughly on the floor. They next lighted a fire in the middle of the barn and fastened the corpse by the feet with a great rope to a beam on the roof. One of them began to turn it slowly before the fire. Come on, he said. addressing the gigantic fellow, the tallest of the four. I'm tired. You'll be to take your turn. Faix and troth, I'll no turn him, replied the big man. There's Pat Driver in under the straw. Why wouldn't he take his turn? Faix and truth, I'll no turn him, replied the big man again. With hideous clamor, the four men called the wretched Pat, who, seeing there was no escape, thought it was his wisest plan to come forth as he was bidden. Now, Pat, they said, you'll turn the corpse, but if you let him burn, you'll be tied up here and roasted in his place. Pat's hair stood on end, and the cold perspiration poured from his forehead, but there was nothing for it but to perform his dreadful task. Seeing him fairly embarked in, the tall men went away. Soon, however, the flames rose so high as to singe the rope, and the corpse fell with a great thud upon the fire, scattering the ashes and the embers, and extracting a howl of anguish from the miserable cook, who rushed to the door and ran for his life. He ran on until he was ready to drop with fatigue, when, seeing a drain overgrown with tall rank grass, he thought he would creep in there and lie hidden till morning. But he was not many minutes in the drain before he heard the heavy tramping again, and the four men came up with their burthen, which they had laid down at the edge of the drain. I'm tired, said the one to the giant. It's your turn to carry him a piece now. Faix and troth, I'll carry him. I'll no carry him, he replied. But there's Pat Driver in the drain. Why wouldn't he come out and take his turn? Come out, Pat, come out, roared all the men. And Pat, almost dread with fright, crept out. He staggered on under the weight of the corpse until he reached Kilrone Abbey, a ruin festooned with ivy, where the brown owl hooted all night long, and the forgotten dead sleep around the walls under the dense matted tangles of brambles and benweed. No one ever buried there now, but Pat's tall companions turned into the wild graveyard and began digging a grave. Pat, seeing thus engaged, thought he might once more try to escape, and climbed up into a hawthorn tree in the fence, hoping to be hidden in the boughs. I'm tired, said the man who was digging the grave. Here, take this spade, addressing his big man. It's your turn. Faix and troth, it's no my turn, replied he. As before, there's Pat Driver in the tree. Why wouldn't he come down and tack his turn? Pat came down to take the spade, but just then the cocks in the little farmyards and the cabins round the abbey began to crow, and the men looked at one another. We must go, said they, and well it is for you, Pat Driver, that the cocks crowed, for if they had not, you'd be just have been bundled into that grave with the corpse. 2 months passed, and Pat wandered far and wide over the country, Donegal, when he chanced to arrive at Rapho during a fair. Among the crowd that filled the diamond, he came suddenly on the big man. How are you, Pat Driver? Said he, bending down to look into the tinker's face. You've the advantage of me, sir, for I haven't the pleasure of knowing you, faltered Pat. Do you not know me then, Pat? When you go back to Inishowen, you'll have a story to tell. And that is Pat Driver, or Farderig in Donegal. More solitary fairy tales. Now, we've only got about, how many minutes do we have left of this show? We've got 9 minutes left. Maybe time for a short one. And I think I've got a couple of short ones in here. And then we'll move on to the captain's cabin after that. Let's see, I've got the Kildare Puka. It's rather short. We can see what we can do about cracking this one out in 9 minutes. The Kildare Puka. This is by Patrick Kennedy. And it goes like this. Mr. H-R-, when he was alive, used to live a good deal in Dublin, and he was once a great while out of the country on account of the 98 business. But the servants kept on in the big house at Rath all the same, as if the family was at home. Well, they used to be frightened out of their lives after going into their beds with the banging of the kitchen door, and the clattering of fire irons, and the pots and the plates and the dishes. One evening they sat up ever so long, keeping one another in heart with telling stories about ghosts and fetches, and that when, what would you have of it, the little scullery boy that used to be sleeping over the horses and could not get room at the fire crept into the hot hearth, and when he got tired listening to the stories, sore fear him, he fell dead asleep. Well and good. After they were gone and the kitchen fire raked up, he was woke with the noise of the kitchen door opening and trampling of an ass on the kitchen floor. He peeped out, and what should he see but a big ass, sure enough, sitting on his currabingo and a yarning before the fire. And after a little he looked out about him, began scratching his ear as if he was quite tired, and says he, I may as well begin first as last. The poor boy's teeth began to chatter in his head, for he says now he's going to ate me. But the fellow with the big long ears and tail on him had something else to do. He stirred the fire and then brought in a pail of water from the pump, filled the big pot, put it on the fire before he went out, then put on his foot, into the hot hearth, and pulled out a little boy. The little boy. He let a roar out of him with fright, but the pooka only looked at him and thrust out his lower lip to show how little he valued him, and when he pitched him into his pew again. Well, he then lay down before the fire till he heard the boil coming on the water, and maybe there wasn't a plate or a dish or a spoon on the dresser that he didn't fetch and put into the pot and wash and dry the whole bilin of them, as well as e'er a kitchen maid from that to Dublin town. He then put all of them up on their places on the shelves, and if he didn't give a good sweep into the kitchen, leave it till again. Then he comes and sits fornant the boy, and let down one of his ears and cocked up the other, and gave a grin. The poor fellow strove to roar out, but not a dehig ud came out of his throat. The last thing the pooka done was to rake up the fire and walk out, giving such a slap o' the door that the boy thought that the house couldn't help but tumble down. Well, to be sure, if there wasn't a hullabaloo next morning when the poor fellow told his story. They could talk of nothing else the whole day. One said one thing, another said another, but a fat, lazy scullery girl said the wittiest thing of all. Musha, she says, if the pooka does be cleaning up everything that way when ye are asleep, what should we be slaving ourselves for doing his work? Shoo good bane, says another. Them's the wisest words you ever said, Koth. It's myself won't be contradicting you. So said, so done. Not a bit of plate or dish saw a drop of water that evening. Not a besom was laid on the floor, and everyone went to bed soon after sundown. Next morning, everything was as fine in the kitchen, and the Lord Mayor might eat his dinner off the flags. It was great ease to the lazy servants, you may depend, and everything went on full well until a foolhardy gag of a boy said he would stay up one night and have a chat with the pooka. He was a little daunted when the door was thrown open and the ass marched up to the fire. And then, sir, says he at last, picking up courage, if it isn't taking a liberty, might I ax who you are, and why you're so kind as to do half the day's work for the girls every night? No liberty at all, says the pooka. I'll tell you and welcome. I was a servant in the time of Squire R's father, and was the laziest rogue that ever was clothed and fed and done nothing at all for it. When my time came for the other world, this is the punishment was laid on me, to come here and do all this labor every night, and then go out into the cold. It isn't so bad in the fine weather, but if you knew who it was to stand with your head between your legs, facing the storm from midnight to sunrise on a bleak winter night. And could we do anything for your comfort, my poor fellow? Says the boy. Musha, I don't know, says the puka, but I think a good quilted frieze coat would help to keep the life of me on those long nights. Why then, in troth, we'd be the ungratefullest of people if we didn't feel for you. To make a long story short, the next night, but two, the boy was there again, and if he didn't delight the poor puka, holding up a fine warm coat before him, it's no matter. Between the pooks and the man, his legs was gone into the forearms of it, and it was buttoned down the breast of the belly, and he was so pleased he walked up to the glass to see how he looked. Well, he says, it's a long lane that has no turning. If I'm much obliged to you and your fellow servants, you've made me happy at last. Good night to you. So he was walking out, but the other cried, "Och, sure you're going too soon. What about the washing and the sweeping?" "Ah, you may tell the girls that they must now get their own turn. My punishments was to last till I was thought worthy of a reward for the way I'd done my duty. You'll see me no more." And no more they did. And the right sorry they were for having been in such a hurry to reward the ungrateful puka. And there you go. That's all we've got time for during the radio show tonight. I hope you enjoyed this. Some readings from the Faerie and Folk Tales of Ireland. And it was put together by W.B. Yeats, William Butler Yeats, the poet laureate of Ireland 100 years ago. And I found them to be really enjoyable stories. And I like to read these to my kids. And so nothing super scary for Ghost Friday, Ghost Day as we call it. But hopefully you enjoyed this, and we'll do it again some other time. So for now, all of those of you listening on the radio show, I have to let you go. Everybody else sit for the captain's cabin. Live long and prosper.
Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid Radio Program, a Scotty Roberts Productions broadcast.
Really nice house.
You did.
That we
I'm
could
back.
buy. But we could buy this.
You know I'm on
house.
the radio.
I know. We could buy this house whenever. One second.
Let me do an intro to the show and let my daughter talk to me for a moment. I'll be right back. Sit still. Well, greetings and welcome to the Captain's Cabin. Good to have you folks here. I hope you enjoyed that little endeavor into just reading stories for the night. I rather enjoyed it. I was reading the stories today and I said, I think this might be an enjoyable thing to do on air. And so there we did it. And I got to put on my glasses to see anybody's comments here. Boy. Whew. Niall Parkinson says, how many Irish people appear on this channel? Remarkable. Could have made a great show of this. Yeah, that could have. That would have been a lot of fun. Hope all is well, he says. Hey, Rowan, says Uncle Dave. Rowan? I don't know where she went. Uncle Dave says hello. I love W.B. Yeats, Sean Stroik, too. So let's see. Let me go a little backwards. And surprised did not get a heads up on you. I tagged you in a post on this, Niall, on Facebook. So did you not get the announcement through the through YouTube? I did tag you in the post on Facebook, though. However, let's see. I'm going back a little bit. That'll be done for him. That'll be done for him, Chuck Thurston says. Maybe something with the story. Oh, that was right after I saw Roger Rabbit say, Guinness. So that was a way back. So we speaking of the good folk. Yes, we were, Niall. Several times in this book. In a couple of the stories I read, they referred to them as the good people. So, and that's what I hear they would call the Faerie folk in Ireland, the people in the countryside. They would refer to them as the good folk or the good people because it was the superstition or the belief that you didn't even say the word fairy or fae or any other such thing that was the official word for them. But you call them the good people or the good folk. And so we did, and I used that in Tam O'Hare, when I wrote that book. How many years ago did I write that book? 1998. So however many years ago that is, 25 years ago or so. So good talk, says Matthew Sainsbury. Thank you. I didn't have to come up with much myself. So just reading. And I read those stories and I lapse into this faux Irish accent. It's just I do it. It's affectatious. I do it for my kids when I read to them. And it just comes naturally when I read the books. So and then it hangs on to me for a while. It's like when Uncle Dave and I would do reenacting. When we're out there and we're doing Scottish brogues for a week in front of an audience, you're talking in your Scottish brogue for so long, and yet the more you drink, the more, the coarser your voice gets for yelling out in the cold and drinking and all of that, and it hangs on for a while. Even after hours, we don't talk that way. So it's just the way it works. So anyway, here we are. We're in the captain's cabin. If you want to call in and talk about some of this stuff, talk about the stories, we'll do this again because this is, frankly, I only hit three stories in one of the poems in this book. And then I've got this other one over here that I've read from for years for my kids. These Jamie Friel and the Fairies is one of my favorite ones. And again, this was also, it's a treasury of Irish myth, legend, and folklore, fairy and folk tales of the Irish peasantry, edited by William Butler Yeats. And there's also includes Cuchulainn of I don't even know how to pronounce it, of Morthemne. By Lady Gregory. It's also in this. So it's a fantastic book. Great for reading to the kids. And I loved this. I saw this and picked it up. I actually got this book, as beautiful as this book is. I picked this up at, do you have in your town or the city where you live, anywhere, a half-price books? That's where I got this particular volume. And here I was gonna just pull this price tag off, but why? Because it's still on the cover for this. There we go. It came right off. How about that? So, but it came in this nice little box. So, and I saw that on the bookshelf, and it was at half price books. So this nice book, very well put together. This cost me all of $12. So I thought that was a pretty good deal. And so I'm going to keep it on the shelf in this box. If I can get it back in the box. There we go. So there it is. So very nice book. And I thought you might enjoy it. So there we go. Anybody else around? Sarah Youssef is here. The lesson of not being nice to the ungrateful puka is terrible. Isn't it, though? Hey, Niall. How you doing, brother?
Scotty,
How you doing,
great
sir?
to see you. I hope you had a nice Christmas, first of all.
Oh, I
really
hope you
do.
did as well. It was
Yes,
very nice.
I had a very pleasant week.
That's good.
I spent a week with an old friend of mine
Oh, that's good.
and her family. And this is someone I know for many years, and it was a great opportunity to catch up and spend some quality time discussing and eating too much and drinking too
As
much, but
always.
also in a very safe environment and a very great environment. I had a great week.
That's
so I
good.
was away from Galway for 6 days. Spent some time in Kildare, which
Sounds
is
like some good quality time, something you needed.
yeah, about 120 kilometers, kind of southeast of me. And so yeah, it was great. I got back yesterday, absolutely exhausted, because you know how these things go, Scotty.
Mhm.
It's like everyone who came to the house brought a big tin of biscuits or a cake or a tin of chocolates or Belgian chocolates. Her sister was
Nice.
over from Belgium, so there was like piles and piles of stuff, and the house was full. It was quite a funny story because there was no real place for me to sleep, and I says, "Well, we know each other quite well, so I'll just sleep on the couch here." And she
Yeah.
has this kind of an L-shaped couch, but quite a large one. You could stretch out in either direction.
Yes.
The L. Once everyone went to bed, which was the problem, because people would stay up till 4 or 5 in the morning, and then eventually everyone would either go home or go to the spare bedrooms.
Yes.
And I was delighted with that situation, because the big screen TV was right in front of me on the couch, so I could check up on all the latest movies and stuff, because I only have a small television at home. And my friend Fiona spent 6 nights with me.
Say hi to Niall as long as you're here.
You're fine.
Hi.
That's
Hi.
Ellery. Go ahead. Go
Ellery,
ahead.
how are you doing? Yeah.
Dad, can you play Monopoly with me?
Not right now.
Monopoly?
At 10 at night? No.
Yes, I don't think so.
She was
You wanna
standing
buy
here,
that
by the way,
hotel?
in that shirt with no pants. She's in bed already.
Yeah.
And so she gets up at 10 o'clock and says, "You want to come and play Monopoly?" No, not tonight, sweetheart. We've all been out all day. So anyway, continue, Niall. Sorry about that.
No, it's quite a sweet story if you have time for it, because it's not
Yeah.
a long story, but it's quite a sweet story.
Please.
In that this is not somebody I've seen for quite some time, and we've always been very close, and I was very appreciative that she invited me up to her home. And her son is 25 and her daughter is 20, and it was amazing seeing the differences in them, and their boyfriends and girlfriends and the people who came over to the house. And
Sure.
so this massive couch in front of the TV became a kind of a central point for myself and Fiona to kind of meet and talk. And so she would eventually, during the holidays, we did Christmas dinner. We did all this. I arrived a couple of days beforehand and stayed for a few days afterwards. So the couch was kind of like this focal point that I spent 6 days sleeping on this couch. It's taken me a couple of days to get over it, because I'm all aches and pains after.
Oh yeah.
But she would go up to bed and come down and see me at 4 or 5 in the morning. and we would talk until dawn, until
That's nice.
the kids woke up, and the TV would be playing in the background. Of course, I'd be fiddling with the remote control, and she says, "No, do you want something to eat?" And all there was to eat was like cakes and biscuits, so we kind of stuffed our faces and
There's worse things.
and caught up on the old times. And
Sure.
there wasn't a drop of alcohol across my lips during the entire time, and it was just a really kind of beautiful experience, And
That's nice.
it was one of those moments where you kind of connect with someone from your past who you had a very we were a long-term couple at one stage, and we always our relationship kind of changed because we got older, and we realized that, listen, I'm not going to lose this person from my life just because we're not together anymore. And I was amazed at how much respect I have from her children, who are adults now, and they regard me in very high esteem. And
That's
and
always
me
very
them.
nice.
And it was like, and her family were so happy to see me. I was like kind of overwhelmed.
That's
by it,
nice too. Yes.
And we did some beautiful things, like on the I arrived on the 22nd, and she said, "No, we're doing a few things now. You're going to be busy. You have to help me with Christmas dinner." I said, "No problem." So we went out on the 23rd at 7 o'clock in the morning to the local big supermarket, and we did all our shopping, and at 7 o'clock in the morning, said, "So we have to get in before everybody arrives," and it was a real sort of a very special moment that you can't really explain in too many words, because it's what it is. It's a description of a couple who have gone through everything together, or two people. I wouldn't say a couple because that has connotations, but two people who have gone through an awful lot together and come out the other side, and just are automatically beautifully connected in a very ordinary way, and doing the shopping together, hanging out with her family, being there for her, being available, talking, nothing heavy,
Yeah.
But if it got heavy, it could get heavy, But for me, it was probably the best Christmas I've ever spent in my life.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And that includes all the childhood memories that I have, which were not great, to be honest.
Sure.
Because there was a lot of dysfunction in my family.
Like,
but this particular Christmas was perfection, because it was just so beautifully honest and simple.
It's like Wendy and I, when we talked on our little show last week, leading up to Christmas, she asked, what was your most favorite memory or cherished memory of Christmas, and what do you believe in recent years, from childhood to recent years? And just thinking on that, you say this was better even than the Christmases that you had as a child. So when you can say that, you can say that's a wonderful thing to say. You in your semi-old age, you're not an old man yet. I got 10
I'm
years
getting
now.
there. I'm 55 soon, so I'm getting there.
You got a little Guinness hanging on your lip, by the way.
Yeah.
So it's always a gentleman that points that out. So, but it's always nice to have something in modern day, when things like Christmas have become not like they were when you were children, and there was the magic and the mystique about it and the stories and all of that. When you grow up and reality hits and you get older and older and cynicism sets in, life sets in, the real world sets in, it's got to be really nice to have those times where what you're describing happened, the best Christmas you've ever had, even thinking back to when you were a child. What a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful story.
And what I mean about that, just to extend the story out even further, is that magical time we remember is when we were children. we are eternal children, I believe, in that there are certain times of the year that just bring out certain things at certain times
Mm-hmm.
in certain environments. And Christmas is one of them. And for me, I suppose it was there's like a veil across the world for the rest of the year, all the madness that we have to go through. And the veil kind of lifts when family members call around and friends call around and people you haven't seen in years, and and you talk and all of a sudden that you find yourself having honest conversation, adult conversation. So to me, there is such a thing as an adult Christmas, which can happen simply because a bunch of people are put together at a certain time of year.
Yes.
And it can go very well, it can go very badly, depending on the situation. But
sure,
it's going to be, in my case, it was extremely profound.
That's wonderful to hear.
What was really profound about it was like I was expecting to be thrown out of the place, to be honest with you.
Really?
Yeah, because I was like, these people don't really respect me. I wasn't even sure they remembered me. Not only did they remember me, they actually expected me long before I arrived. And Fiona said to me, I told you, she's been saying this to me for the last 5 years, you have to come down because everyone wants to see you. And I was like, no, they don't. And it turns out they actually did. And it not only did they want to see me, I wanted to see them. So it was one of those Christmases that turned into an amazing experience, and the L-shaped couch turned into the focal point, because what would happen is by the time everyone kind of fell asleep eventually, because the whole family stayed in the house for the entire week, in various parts of the house, the spare bedrooms, etc. And I was kind of delighted when I got the L-shaped couch, but she would always come down from bed about 4 o'clock in the morning. And I said, what are you doing down here every night? What are you doing down here? I couldn't sleep. Why not? I just wanted to be with you.
That's nice.
How nice is that? There was nothing sexual in it. There was nothing, there was no connotations. It was just, I just wanted to be here with you, And we would just sit on the couch until, and says, what do we do today? We need some groceries today. Let's go and get some groceries. So, in a very long way. But I think it's something that you would appreciate as a kind of it might never happen again in my lifetime. But that's why I can honestly say it was the most important and most profound and most beautiful Christmas I've ever spent. Because I connected not just with Fiona, but with her children and her extended family, and the conversation was very flowing, and even though we were exhausted, had a lot of work to do, a lot of running around, Christmas dinner and all that kind of stuff. It was a great week. So that's that.
Dave said that's how I was on Christmas Eve. Uncle Dave was over at our house for Christmas Eve, and I had every one of my children were here. I have 6 children, and my twin daughters came from North Carolina with one of my daughter's husband, the husband of one of my daughters, and my son, my older son, came, my 22-year-old son, and then my 3 children here, and my sister was here with her husband, and Uncle Dave came over, and did we have anybody else here? But I think that must be what Dave is referring to. It was just when he says that's how I was on Christmas Eve. Yeah, everybody was here. And it was no big doings. We had, we did some ham and some roasted chicken and things like that. And the pies and the cakes and the cookies and the, you name it. And so it was wonderful. It was I wished it would have lasted longer. And, you're in it and you say, I wish this would last longer. But then when you're done and you look back, you go, well, I'm glad it only lasted as long as it did, because I've got that memory now. I've got that thing. It's tucked away in my heart. It's there.
It's like you're a very emotional man, and you often talk from your heart. And it takes a lot more for me to actually reach my heart.
Sure.
But but they're like snapshots.
Yeah.
Christmas time is like snapshots, and at the time, sometimes it can seem like a pain in the ass. There's too many people around and too much hassle, and But
Sure.
then after the fact, you think, wow, it wasn't it fantastic? We were all together at that time,
Yeah.
and who knows? Some of us maybe for the last time. Nobody
Yeah.
knows. It's like
You
it's
never
like,
know.
and all of a sudden you start looking at people through different eyes and saying, well, maybe we shouldn't take this stuff for granted.
Hmm.
That this kind of thing is going to happen every year. And it's going to be very complicated, and it's going to be you have to entertain all these people. But then if you look through another's eyes, you might think, well, it might be the last time some of us are together,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
so from that point of view, I suppose that Christmas has taken on a value I hope will continue into my later years of that, in that I will make it more of an effort from now on
Right.
to visit people at Christmas time, and be available, because there is something about that time of year that kind of um, introduces a more honest and a more emotional
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
a friendlier and open kind of environment for people to be honest with each other in a
Yeah.
nice way. And you can be amazed, at the responses that you get. That's my experience of this year. And
Yeah.
I haven't had many Christmases like that. To be honest, and
You know,
many people claim they have experiences like that every year, but I don't believe them.
yeah.
I think it's when it comes together right, it kind of comes together right.
I think there are lots of people that have their experience. It's the fun time of year for them. It's enjoyable. It's loving for them, and they enjoy that. But I think, if I can be so bold as to say this to you, I think when you haven't had that every year and it happens, that is the mountaintop. That is the pinnacle experience of them. A lot of people have this every year of one sort or another. But I think for you, knowing what you've said about yourself and talked about your life at other times, and this being the very best Christmas you can remember since even when you were a kid, that this for you isn't something that happens as often as maybe you haven't even thought of. It's not as often as I like it. That may not even have crossed your mind, but what crosses your mind is that this was different. It was unique. It was loving. It was heart-filled. It was maybe something that you don't experience on a lot of levels.
And it was natural.
And it was natural.
I didn't expect this, like from people who I thought maybe disliked me for one reason or another. It turns out all of this almost entirely was in my own head. Everyone was so happy to see me. I was just. I'm not saying this to blow smoke up my ass.
No. I don't take it that way at all.
It was like, really, I just couldn't believe it, and the kindness and the sense of emotion that arose in me, I wasn't used to, because I'm not an emotional man. I'm not prone to strong feelings of emotion.
Well,
but when I was in that environment, I actually had to stop myself and say, "Get it together now. You can't stop. You can't start to cry in front of these people because they won't understand why you're doing that."
Well, I see you, for as much as you say that about yourself. I'm relating back where you say you're not trying to blow smoke or sunshine up. I don't take it that way at all, because I go back to the fact that I think you are a deeply emotional man. You're an artist, and you express your emotions in your art. You may not be able to sit there and tell the wonderful tale that makes somebody weep every time, but you can paint that, you can draw that, you express what's in here for you outward through your artwork. So for you to say, I'm not blowing sunshine up your ass, that this is the way I felt at the moment. I don't take that at all as you talking about or bragging about. When you say everybody seemed to be really happy to see you, you're telling me that tale from your heart. You're saying, in essence, you're almost saying, I was just as taken aback by this as you might be in hearing the tale. And I'm relating to you all what this did to me. It made me feel this way. And so I see you, Niall, as a man who, you're different than me. You're different. We're all different, but you have just as deeply set emotions that are triggered by certain things, or that govern the way you think, sometimes in different ways than it governs other people. Other people might gush about things. You might hold that in and go, well, I don't think happiness is possible, or whatever it might be, whatever you're saying about anything. But then it grips you when you have your experience.
Yeah, and it kind of at times it kind of blindsides you.
Yes.
Like in one example I mentioned earlier on, I didn't drink during the entire week because my ex-partner Fiona is a recovering alcoholic, and
Sure.
She said, "No, there's only one thing I ask is that you don't drink," and I said, "I
That's
won't."
very conscientious of you. That's
Even though everyone else was drinking their asses off, I didn't. And she said, "Because I need you."
And look
She used those words, "I need you around."
And look what that did for you. When she asked you that, how were you? Were you negative? No, you were fully of it. This is my heart. I'm glad to not drink this week.
I actually was,
and
Shawnee.
so there
I was
you
about
go.
to call you because I was speaking to Shawnee earlier. But
It's all right.
it was completely and utterly not even part of the deal. I was like, I wasn't resentful about the fact that I couldn't drink.
Sure.
I was actually glad that I couldn't drink.
Yeah.
I was actually, just having a cup of coffee or a Coke or whatever. And and her son was wandering in with his friends. Her daughter was wandering in with her friends, and it was chaos at times. There's cans everywhere, and there was people, and it was kind of funny that I had to bring so many people up to bed. And Fiona would just say to me, "No, would you bring such and such up to bed?" I says, "No problem." That's so I pick up a guy off the couch, a friend of the family.
Nice.
Listen, we have to stay in the middle of the stairs, right? So don't grab the railing, okay? And don't put your hands on the wall because you'll knock down the paintings. So I'm just going to grab you by the arms and just kind of guide you up the stairs. And
nice.
And he was like, Thanks very much, Niall. It was great. Thanks very much. Thanks very much up the stairs. And this is your bedroom. And I just kind of deposit the guy on the bed.
Uncle Dave's had to do that to me before.
Yeah.
So
and do you know what, Scotty? It really made me feel a part of everything, because it made me feel that I had a role to play, and a very important role. And when Fiona used to come down at 4:00 in the morning to talk to me when everyone else was asleep, we would talk. I'm still trying to digest it, but it was a very emotionally natural experience for me. No urge to drink, no resentment, no awkwardness, no shyness, nothing like that. It was just one of those moments that probably won't come around again.
And that's beautiful. And if you're anything like me, you have that experience. And in trying to relate how it made you feel, you're sometimes wondering, am I actually expressing the depth of what I can't put into words, the depth of how this made me feel. I hear that in your voice. Not that you doubt your own words. It's that you say, I can only tell you this, but I almost can't express how real this was for me, how deep and meaningful it was for me. And
very, very, very simplistic. And also there's a big part of me who feels that I didn't deserve the respect that I got, from that household. I had people wandering in who were like so drunk
Right.
that they could have said anything to me, but I got nothing but respect, and
That's wonderful.
I tried to analyze that as best I could in the moment, and just the rest of the time I went with the flow, But it was, I think there's a great love there somewhere. I think that there is a love story there,
Yes.
between myself and my ex partner. Um, we couldn't make it work as a couple, but there is a love story, and
I
it's
understand that.
I'm not a romantic man by any stretch of the imagination, but there was so much natural chemistry and just an acceptance and just a happiness, to be
Mhm.
sitting on the same couch together. We didn't have to
That's
say
wonderful.
anything, just to be there. So yeah, so it was a very profound experience for me, and it kind of it made me think that maybe I'm not such the biggest asshole as I thought I was. There are a number of redeeming qualities, and also that I've been taking a lot of stuff for granted, and maybe I should get out of my own head sometimes and just let life
Sure.
happen. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's a
that's that.
wonderful
I
story.
knew you. That's why I went into such great detail about that story, because I
I'm
knew you
glad you
would like
did.
it. I knew you
I'm
would like it,
glad you
Scotty.
did.
Mm,
All right. That's a wonderful story, brother. And
mm.
thank you for sharing that. I mean that. So it's good to hear. I'm happy for you that you experienced that.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm sure you had a equally as happy a time.
It was a
You
happy
might.
time. There were times I will tell you, to be honest. Wendy asked me this in our show, and she took me off guard with the question a little bit, but something about how I feel about Christmas, or what does it do to me nowadays. And I said, Christmas to me sometimes seems like an empty knot in my stomach. I love it, and I love everything about it. I love the aromas of Christmas. I love the scents, and the feeling, and the togetherness. And but there's always that there's some unresolved knot that is in there that leaves it. You'd think somebody like me, because I talk about things so openly and freely, that I would be just emotionally loving Christmas all the time, and it doesn't always treat me that way, and maybe I don't treat myself that way, and um, it's
And
that
maybe Christmas brings it up in you.
it brings it up in me. Maybe
Yes.
it's the fleeting nature of it for me. I
Mm,
can enjoy the moment and be in the moment, but then there is the whole the passing moment of it. Maybe it's the idea of this is not what things are every day anymore. I don't get to see all my kids every day. I don't get
mm,
to see everybody together. I don't get to experience that. I had said to Rainey earlier in the week, I said,
mm.
when is it going to be the time where I said, I'm so tired of going to people's places in the family. And that's what you do when you're young. You go to grandma's house, or mom and dad's house, or their mom and dad's house, or
Mm.
whatever it might be. I said, I want the day to come when everybody comes to our place. They come to us, and this is it. We go to dad's for Christmas, or whatever it might be. And so I had a little bit of that feeling this Christmas. It was nice because everybody was here, and it made you wish you had a more sprawling mansion, so you could say nobody has to go home. We got rooms down the hall for you. There's a room made up for
Yeah.
you, and
I think it's probably it's a complex subject when you get into
yes,
it, because also it brings up your mortality, because you might actually think, Well, yeah, because it's like a milestone. Every Christmas is like a milestone. It's like the ending of one year and the beginning of another. It's like, will I be around for the next one, or what will change
Right.
at the
Right.
next one? So maybe that knot in your stomach is part of that, or is what will change? What there's
Right.
this slight fear, which is perfectly understandable. I think everyone feels that at this time of year,
Yeah.
going into the new year. There's that knot in your stomach that kind of says that, well, is anything going to be different next year? Or
Right. Right.
will, what's going to happen in the next year? A slight trepidation about the coming year. I think that's
Hmm.
some of it, especially as you get older, especially guys our age.
I'll tell
We,
you,
we, we tend to think like that.
I don't ever really have I don't know that this is where you were going. This is where my mind went. I don't really have a fear of feeling like, oh, I might be dead next year. That doesn't cross my mind. It's not,
Mm.
for me, it's not that. But it is the changes. It's the things. I think it's the things I want to be better for next year. There's a certain, um, thus and so for me about life, that things have to be this way. It's like the perfection of a room. If you're putting your room together and you want that over there and you want that thing there and that drape hanging that way and whatever, it's this perfection of a picture in my head. And I think it does that to me emotionally as well, to say there's a picture in my head of what I want this to be. And I hate when anybody misses out. There was, I think it was last Christmas or some other time, my son couldn't be there, my older son, and I was like, I've got all my kids here except my older son, and I miss that. And but to get this year, they were all here, and
Yeah. So in that case, the knot in your stomach, it could be to do with that, but I'd say it be to do with your childhood and your own.
probably. And I haven't delved that depth, and I'm
Yeah, yeah.
not even gonna think about that here. But we
No,
always
no,
had
but
good
I
Christmases.
just mean that
Yeah,
in a good-hearted way. I just
my
think
my memories of
there's always
Christmas.
an explanation for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my memories of Christmas as a child are very good.
Mm.
Everybody was always together. The family was always together. I think there's that element of having the people in our family that held Christmas and held the family closest and the tightest together, tied all the knots on everything, and were always there on the holidays, are all gone now. And and the family's kind of spread out. So the family is no longer my family of origin. The
Mm.
family is my family, and the shoots off of my family, as opposed to me being a branch off the old family. So that might be some of it. So, by the way,
Yeah.
hi Lisa Marie Stucci, good to see you, honey. So, yeah, maybe that's some of it. I'll think about it one of these days and decipher
No, I guarantee it's some of it. It always comes up in some form or another. That knot in the stomach at certain times of year. It's like a trigger. It's
Yeah,
just but it's not necessarily bad nor good. It's just a
right.
trigger.
And
A trigger
Sarah,
for
Sarah Youssef, you're right. She says it's the same with artistry. The image in the head doesn't always match the reality, and
in fact,
there's a truth to that.
it never matches the reality. I would
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Why
paint.
don't Why don't you come on? She's always here. Maybe she doesn't want to come on tonight.
Yeah, you can
And
come on,
anyway,
Sarah.
you were talking about the fairy folk earlier on, the fae, um,
Yes.
and the writings of W.B. Yeats. Yeah, this is it's great stuff. I mean, you really have to admit
Oh,
it. I mean, the she, we it's pronounced the she,
yeah.
Sidhe. It's it morphed into banshee over the years,
Mm-hmm.
which actually ban means woman or female, and the she of the land. So what it actually translates into is she who sweeps the land. So that's banshee. So the she or the mound dwellers, the ones who dwell under the ground. They sweep the land, and they make of the land their own pasture or own territory. That if you venture into that territory, you get swallowed up and tricked, or sometimes you can be invited in, and but you're invited into a territory which is below ground, which is the She fairy folk.
Do
And a lot of people,
they exist? Do you believe?
I think that there's a very powerful belief system, and I think there are many occurrences which have not been explained, and I think there are many people there's many areas of Ireland which are looked upon as somehow evil, or they can't be disturbed, because we actually have a very similar culture to North America, the Native American mound culture. We have underground grave systems and mound system which exist in many farmers' lands, and in fact, only in the last few years, through various radar systems, they've been able to identify various grave sites in fields around Ireland, which always take a circular form, and are always very confined in a particular place. And then when you trace it back to folklore, that was the land that the people in the village warned their children not to go into, because they would disappear, and there were disappearances, and there were people who had strange experiences with what they would call the good people, because sometimes they would offer them gifts if they gave something in return. It was like a barter system.
Yes.
That's where the whole folklore of the leprechaun came from. The pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Right.
It's like the devil's highway. We give you a few shillings of gold now if you get to the end of the devil's highway. That's where there were the good people, the good folk. But in reality, the mythology is very much based on underground, on the underground, the ones who live underneath, and the banshee is the one who sweeps the land. She is the one who calls the dead down below ground, W.B. Yeats speaks famously of these topics in his poetry and his writings, because he's known in some circles as an occultist in some ways, the unknown, and he actually refers to the fairy folk in literal terms. He actually believed they literally exist.
I believe that he was a huge believer that they existed. There was one of my favorite poems of his, which is, I'm sure, very well known to you. I'll read it here. This is out of his other book that I have here, The Stolen Child. And by Yeats. He says, "Where dips the rocky highland of Sleuthwood in the lake, there lies a leafy island where flapping herons wake the drowsy water rats. There we've hid our fairy vats, full of berries and of reddest stolen cherries. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wave of moonlight glosses the dim gray sands with light, far off by furthest Rosses, we foot it all the night, weaving olden dances, mingling hands and mingling glances, till the moon is taken flight. To and fro we leap and chase the frothy bubbles, while the world is full of troubles, and is anxious in its sleep. Come away, O human child, to the woods and waters wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wandering water gushes from the hills above Glencar, in pools among the rushes that scarce could bathe a star, we seek for slumbering trout, and whispering in their ears, we give them evil dreams, leaning softly out from ferns that drop their tears of dew on the young streams. Come, O human child, to the woods and waters wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Away with us he's going, the solemn-eyed. He'll hear no more the lowing of the calves on the warm hillside, or the kettle on the hob sing peace into his breast, or see the brown mice bob round and round the oatmeal chest. For he comes, the human child, to the woods and waters wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than he can understand.
Perfect.
So,
And you can see in the particular the Stolen Child, as it unfolds, it's all about the landscape and
yes,
the animals within it, and being taken away and disappearing and not being found, and losing oneself. And
yes,
Yeats was a huge fan is the wrong word, but he was a huge proponent. It's just it's
yes,
in all his writings.
yes.
And yeah, he believed wholeheartedly that literally that you can be stolen um, uh, away from your environment. But he didn't do it in a C.S. Lewis way. It's not like the Chronicles of
Right,
Narnia or anything like
right.
that.
Very different.
It was much darker, really, in its connotations. Um, Beautifully put, but it's all about the land, and it's all about what is contained within the land
Right.
and under the land, and also the creatures of the land are in cahoots with this process. So Yeats was a very big believer in the occultish nature of nature, and the forests and the trees and what is contained underneath them, and also the fairy folk. He was a huge believer in the actual physical presence of an entire subspecies. He
Yes.
never referred to them really as humanity, but he referred to them almost in terms of a sort of slightly evil race or entities that existed within the land that could draw you away from your natural habitat,
Yes.
And he wrote about that endlessly,
Yes.
So Yeats was a big proponent, but those mythologies were well in place at that stage.
For a long time before that.
Yes. Do I believe them myself? I think the answer has to be absolutely. You can't sit and kind of say, I've been all over this land. There are places in this land where you can walk into an environment and just know that you shouldn't be there. And you can walk into an environment and just know that you might not be able to find your way out. It's a sense that you get. It's like the land itself is kind of pushing you away or drawing you in, And I think that's where a lot of the mythology comes from in this land. The actual physical attributes that are put to the fairy folk, there's a lot of Hollywoodization that went on. The whole leprechaun thing came from that. But the good people were people who could be bartered with. But what that ultimately meant, in reality, you weren't bartering with a little 2 foot tall person. You are bartering with the land itself to let you live, to give you a good harvest, to not destroy. And there was a very pagan feel to the generations of Irish people who grew up, and the famine, of course, was exemplified that, because they had to rely on a religion that didn't exist around them, that abandoned them. The Catholic Church abandoned the Irish people during the famine. No priest, died during the famine. Everything was abandoned, so they turned to the land, and so they started to bury their dead in mound-like structures. They had been doing long before that, but the whole idea of the good people was they used to leave offerings then, hoping tomorrow would be a better day, and sometimes it would, and then the whole mythos of the banshee, as I was explaining earlier on, which is a very important one, because it's a bit like a good analogy of the banshee is like the sirens of the sea, which sailors talk about. Could draw you down to its depths with its song.
Sure.
The banshee was the one who sweeps the land. So
Yes.
always female in form, very paganistic, can sweep the land and bring you down. Or just sweep the land. The long shriek of the banshee during the night, brings the sound of death to your door. These were the stories that young children were told. So do I believe that there's something in it? Absolutely, because I do think that there is so much horror and death that occurred on this island, and so many people who died in situations where they weren't surrounded by love. They weren't surrounded by even fortitude. They were surrounded by a sense of despair, and they actually felt that the mythology that was presented to them would take their family members down into the land and protect them, not resurrect them, just protect them and keep them. That's why we had this mound history of creating our graves below ground, just with a slight rise on the surface, So to answer your question, do I believe in actual entity that comes up from the ground? Yeah, I think more not so much physically, but I believe that there is a definitely
a spiritual
entity that is based around pain, suffering, nature, that has the ability to confuse you, because a lot of people have gone missing, and as I said earlier on, I've been on these lands where I literally don't know where I am anymore.
I would love to, if you haven't done so already, I'd love to see you do a piece on the banshee or the she.
Yeah, I mean, the she would be especially important, because the she would be the equivalent of a very I suppose it would be the equivalent of the Greek Pan or something like that, in that not a trickster, much more serious than that, but a kind of a shout out that bad stuff is happening, and we're going to have to clean this area out because this is our territory, and if you want to wander in here, we're going to take you down.
Right.
Unless you have something to offer us in return. So that's where the whole the idea.
Come around and say hi. Sorry,
I would add to that, if you're going to do the banshee, treat it well so you don't raise its ire.
I think the she, as we call them, or the banshee, she who sweeps the land is the translation. Deserves respect, because I think it is. I think it's the spirit of suffering that can transform itself into physical properties depending on who's looking. I think what people need to get out of their heads is this idea of little people running around. Yeah, this is it earned some money for some local people, and started off the whole leprechaun industry. But yeah, I think the land is severely drenched in blood, exactly like the Native American land is. And it's curious that the Native American land also has a mound culture. Yeah, there's a lot I could talk about the Fae and the She, and some of it is very scary because I've been in every field in this land, and I've walked into fields where I just know I shouldn't be there, and I've actually been turned around at times where I can't remember where I came in from. All of a sudden, I turn around and the gate isn't there anymore, and there's a hedge there. And in fact, the gate is over there. Okay.
Oh my!
So it feels like the land plays with you at times. I never actually saw
That was
a creature or anything like that. But
oh, you look famished. Surely you want to sit down and eat with us. No, I don't.
That was like the little story I read from the end of that book by Malachi McCourt. He wrote of remembering back when his father, when he was a little boy, his father took him out in the fields to see the well that sprouted up out of the ground. And he took him over hill and vale and through these fields and pastures and the old tree. And there was the well, sure enough. And it was the sweetest water he'd ever drunk and so on. And many, many years later, long after his father had died, and he was an older man himself, he said, I went back to look for those fields, for that well. And he says, I went over the same track. I went down the same pasture. I saw the same tree. And I trounced back and forth, he says, and never could find that well again.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Scotty, because that's exactly what happens. And that's what's kind of supernatural about this, is that the land can change and the boundaries can change.
Yes.
And what was there is no longer there. And we're talking about land that went back generations. And all of a sudden, I remember speaking to one man who was a distant relative of my family. And he had a huge swathe of land.
Okay.
And I remember him saying to me one night, the land has changed. The fields have changed. He says, the boundaries have changed. I says, what do you mean? Has your neighbor put up a new fence? No, nothing like that. It's just everything has changed.
Yeah.
It was never this steep, or it was never this low, and I believe this man wholeheartedly, because you can sense when you spend time in the rural countryside and you get to know it well, the land kind of undulates. It undulates over the generations, and it kind of leaves a sense of sucking you in or pushing you out.
Sure.
So that's where the mythology comes from. So yeah, I mean, my take on the fair and the Fae and the furry folk. I'm not going to sit here and go, I believe in little guys running around, and
sure.
But
that's the fairy book version we have in our head.
All of it has a sense of realism about it. There is something real about it.
Yes.
There is a definite presence there within the land, and of the land, and the trickster's nature. I'll end on this. The trickster nature of it is that it can present itself in any way it wants to. So it can present itself as small people,
sure,
or it can present something that will draw you in and confuse you and bring you down beneath. But it's kind of all related to the land, to death, to territory, to all of these kind of things.
I understand that.
And Yeats was big into all of that stuff. Yeah.
Yes, he was. Well worth reading his poetry, folks, if you never have. But let me say, Niall, I thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you for calling in
No
tonight
problem.
and making your story a part of what we were doing here. And we did lose Sarah along the way. So good night, Sarah. Thanks for calling in. And we never got you in, but that's okay. We'll get you another night. And Uncle Dave, good to see you as well.
Tomorrow,
So,
all day.
tomorrow. All right. Just call when you're coming.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
You have
We're
a good
putting
night.
lights up
brothers.
tomorrow.
Niall, see you later.
Sorry for waffling, but it was a good show, and I
No,
enjoyed the
thank you.
answer.
Don't be sorry about anything. Thank you for being here and doing
Okay.
what you did and talking about it.
Okay. Good
All right,
night,
guys.
folks. Good night.
I'll see you later. You have a good night. Folks, and that's it for tonight. That's all we got. What a wonderful story from Niall. A story of real things. That meant a lot to me to have him share his personal story from Christmas. So all of you, thank you for being here tonight. And we will see you again on Sunday morning. So live long and prosper.